Following his catastrophic defeat in Russia, all of his enemies united against him. But Napoleon will not go down without a fight. The fate of Europe is about to be decided in the greatest campaign in history. After his disastrous invasion of Russia, Napoleon returned to Paris to rebuild his shattered army, leaving the remnants of the Grande Army under the command of Marshal Murat, who was unwell. However, Murat abandoned the army to return to his kingdom of Naples, prompting Napoleon's adopted son, Eugene, to take command. Meanwhile, some advisors urged Emperor Alexander I to negotiate peace with Napoleon, but he resolved to press on and revenge the destruction of Moscow. At that time, Prussia signed a truce with Russia, and Austria declared neutrality. Russian armies swiftly advanced, culminating in their entry into Warsaw on February 7th. Concurrently, Eugene, after establishing garrisons in strategic fortresses, retreated westward. Many of these garrisons subsequently faced sieges. On February 28th, the Russians entered Berlin without resistance. On March 9th, Prussia declared war on France, and 8 days later, King Frederick William III issued his famous proclamation, "And main folk to my people," marking the start of the War of German Liberation. Since its defeat in 1806, Prussia had reformed its army under General von Scharnhorst. Additionally, Prussia formed Freikorps volunteer irregular units made up of students, urbanites, and others, including the renowned Lützen Freikorps. The Prussians mobilized an army of 80,000 regular troops to bolster the newly formed Sixth Coalition against Napoleon. Around the same time, Sweden also joined the coalition. Its crown prince, Karl Johann, formerly Marshal Bernadotte of France, had turned against Napoleon after becoming Sweden's heir in 1810. By 1813, Bernadotte had assembled a Swedish force of 30,000 to 40,000 soldiers. Meanwhile, Napoleon worked hard to assemble a massive new Grande Army. He called up 138,000 conscripts, mobilized 80,000 National Guard troops, brought in 45,000 veterans from Spain, 20,000 survivors from Russia, and 16,000 Marines. Despite these efforts, many troops were still being mobilized. There was a critical shortage of cavalry and artillery, with many lost in Russia. The new conscripts were mostly inexperienced and aged between 21 and 23. Despite their lack of training, many still believed in Napoleon's legendary genius on the battlefield. At that time, the French had been pushed back, with Eugene retreating to the city of Magdeburg. Dresden had fallen into Prussian hands, while Russian Cossacks raided deep behind French lines, reaching as far as Hamburg and sparking local uprisings against French occupation. However, on 28th of April, Field Marshal Kutuzov died by pneumonia. Peter Wittgenstein took command of the Russian army. Napoleon now had 220,000 troops, while the Allies 180,000 troops. Napoleon ordered Marshal Devout with 35,000 troops to Hamburg. As Napoleon marched towards Saxony, the Allied army, instead of retreating, they decided the bold decision to stand and fight. The Allies devised a plan to strike Napoleon's right flank as he crossed the Saale River. Napoleon's limited cavalry left him with little intelligence on their movements. On May 1st, as French forces advanced toward Lützen, Marshal Bessières, leading a reconnaissance mission near the village of Rippock, was struck by a cannonball and killed instantly. Bessières was one of Napoleon's oldest and most trusted marshals, just like Lannes. On May 2nd, Marshal Ney's, the Third Corps, was stationed southwest of Lützen, assigned the critical task of holding the French right flank. His troops were dispersed across several villages in the area. The Prussian-Russian forces, advancing from Pagau, launched their attack late in the morning. Around 11:30 a.m., General Blecker led the Prussian assault, aiming for Großgarten. Expecting to confront only a small French detachment, Blecker instead encountered a full division. He immediately ordered a bombardment of the French lines before pushing forward with an attack. The Prussians succeeded in driving the French out of Großgarten, capturing Kleingarten and Rana. Ney, however, quickly mounted a counterattack, regaining the villages after fierce fighting that resulted in heavy losses on both sides. Yet, at around 2 p.m., Blecker sent his last brigade forward, forcing the French to retreat again. The Prussians advanced as far as Kaya, before Blecker being wounded. Napoleon, who had been visiting the site of the 1630 Battle of Lutzen nearby, heard the cannon fire and rushed to the battlefield. By mid-afternoon, he arrived and began rallying the retreating conscripts. As French reinforcements arrived, Ney successfully halted the Allied advance at Kaya. By 4 p.m., the intensity of the battle increased as both sides committed their reserves. The villages, particularly Kaya, changed hands several times as the fighting raged on. As the Allied forces pressed their advance, Napoleon ordered his Grande battery, a concentrated mass of 100 guns, to unleash a devastating cannonade. With the arrival of Bertram's the 4th Corps and MacDonald's the 11th Corps on Napoleon's flanks, the French position was secured. Finally, Napoleon sent in the Imperial Guard for a massive counterattack aimed at reclaiming the villages. A desperate cavalry charge from the Prussians briefly pushed the French from Rana, but after intense fighting, the French managed to drive back the Prussian and Russian forces by 6 p.m. By nightfall, the coalition army began to retreat in good order, narrowly avoiding a complete rout due to the lack of sufficient French cavalry to pursue them.